I know this is a majorly hyped book. I happened to find it in the dollar section at my local bookstore. It took me a really long time to finish it. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you all had a wonderful summer filled with fantastic books and reading. I am here today to talk about some of the books that I finished this summer. Not the largest stack, but I enjoyed what I read so far. Mostly physical books, a couple audiobooks thrown in there. I am going to go over the physical books first, and then I'll talk briefly about the audiobooks as well. So we're going to dive right in. I concluded my reread of The Summer I Turned Pretty trilogy or series this summer. So I finished We'll Always Have Summer back in, I want to say, the end of June. This is the third book in the series. So many of you are probably watching the third season of the show right now on, Amazon Prime. I'm also watching it. So no spoilers, don't worry. I will say read the books if you want more of Belly and the boys. The books are very different from the show. The general idea is there with characters and main plot points, but they take a lot of liberties in the show. However, I do believe it'll probably conclude in the same way, being that the major things that happen in the books are also occurring in the show. If you are frustrated with the third season of the show, you'll probably also be a little frustrated with the third book. Again, I can't go too deep into the details of this book because I don't want to give anything away, but it's a fun read. It's YA. It reads a lot younger than it actually is. It's certainly a lot younger than the show is, so keep that in mind. But overall, very cute and enjoyable. Perfect for the summer. Perfect for your beach read. Easy, light reading. So if you are finished with the show or you haven't even watched the show and are interested in the story, then I do recommend reading the Summer I Turned Pretty series. And if you do choose to read it, definitely stick with it to the end and complete it with We'll Always Have Summer. That is the third book in the series and the first book I finished this summer. The second book I finished this summer, also a reread for me. It was Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I was very fuzzy on the details of this book going into the reread, and I'm happy about that because so much of it seemed new to me. It was extremely enjoyable and entertaining, like I remember it being the first time I read it. It takes place in a small town called Sunshine Falls. It's in North Carolina, and we follow Nora and Charlie, two sharks in the literary world. Both of them find themselves in Sunshine Falls, this small town. And there we just have the classic small town tropes. We have the love story. We have a cute small downtown area with a bookstore, independent stores, coffee shop, things like that. But we also have these two very strong characters from New York City plopped in this small town, having to slow down and live a more laid-back life than they are used to. They're kind of forced into this situation and forced to take a breath. I love Charlie and Nora. They might be my favorite couple that Emily Henry writes. However, I have not read all of Emily Henry's books, so the jury is still out on that one, but I loved this book. I loved the flashbacks to New York City when Nora and her sister Libby were just young girls. They got to adventure around New York City with their mother, fall in love with the city like their mother loved the city. Particularly, I love the flashbacks that take place in the bookstore in New York, and I also love the scenes that take place in the bookstore in Sunshine Falls. This is a rom-com, like I want to say a majority of Emily Henry's books are, and again, overall loved it. Glad I did the reread and highly recommend if you have not read Book Lovers yet. The next book I read was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This book was phenomenal. I am not all that familiar with Taylor Jenkins Reid's writing. I read Daisy Jones in the Six, I don't know, 6 years ago, and this is only my second novel by Reid, and it was incredible. I could not put it down. It was definitely a 5-star read for me. I really didn't know what to expect going into it, but I loved all the aspects of this story. I would say it's a family drama type literary fiction novel. We follow the Riva family, starting with Mick and June, the parents of the kids in this novel. And we learn a little bit about their history, how they became a couple, how they started a family, and so on. I was very interested in Mick and June's story. Taylor Jenkins Reid knows how to write a villain type character or an antagonist and make you dislike them, but also kind of feel bad and pity them in a way, which I think is very difficult for the reader to actually feel any sympathy for the bad guy in the story. I think that's probably very hard for an author to do, but she definitely accomplished it in this book. I don't know if that was her goal. I don't know if she wanted us readers to feel bad for Mick, but at times I caught myself kind of feeling a little sorry for him and trying to sympathize or empathize with him, but then I would have to snap out of that and realize that he's a pretty terrible guy, so I shouldn't be feeling sorry for him. I went off on a little tangent. The point is to say, Taylor Jenkins Reid, she does a really great job at writing her characters and teaching us all about their history, their psyche, how they interact with one another. And that's done really well in this book, particularly because we have so many characters. Of course, we have the Riva kids. It's Nina, Kit, Hud, and Jay are the main characters in this book, but we have so many other characters. The cast is huge, and we learn so much about these quote-unquote side characters, but I wouldn't even call them side characters because their part in the story is so crucial. Taylor Jenkins Reid, she gives all of these side characters the spotlight, their own little chapter, and we learn about their past, their present, their psyche, their mindset going into this party, and so on. And all of that builds so well to create this overall story and to lead us to why the fire happened. So I glossed over that. The story's basically about the Riva kids, these 4 very famous kids, surfers and surf photographers, just very successful and well known in California. And every year Nina throws this huge end of the summer party, except this year it ends in a fire, and we know that going in. It's on the flap of the book. So the whole story is building to this fire, and we are piecing together how it happened, why it happened, but also we're just piecing together the history of the Riva family. I can go on and on. This book was incredible. I probably didn't do it justice in my description just now, but if you are at all intrigued by anything of what I just said, definitely pick up Malibu Rising. I'm certainly glad that I did, and I would recommend this book for sure. My next book, I have a little placeholder here, which is my reading journal where I keep track of all the books that I've read. I don't have the physical copy with me. I left it back in New Jersey. I spent some time there with family a couple weeks ago, and I left my copy there because I couldn't fit it in my suitcase. But I read Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. It is a YA romance book, very cute. I happened to find it in the dollar section at my local bookstore, and I couldn't pass it up. I've seen reviews of it floating around on Bookstagram and BookTube, and I was like, you know what, why not? I haven't read a good rom-com YA in a novel. I'm so glad I did pick it up. It had a fantastic enemies to lovers / fake dating type trope to it, and the characters were pretty likable. What I liked most about the story were the nods to so many popular rom-com movies. Each chapter opens up with a quote from a famous rom-com movie, whether that's When Harry Met Sally, one of my favorites, or How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, I don't know, popular rom-com movies. But the chapters open up with a quote from rom-com movies, and that quote kind of hints at what the chapter is going to be about. So our main girl, she is a lover of all things rom-com. She wants to live her life like she's the lead character in a rom-com, and that is perfect because the boy she's been crushing on forever happens to move back to town, and she is hoping that this year, her senior year, will be the year that he notices her and they end up in a relationship together, and so on. Cue the fake dating enemies to lover trope. We have the neighbor, the enemy of our lead girl for so long, and they kind of work together to get the attention of the love interest, and then the story unfolds. So you can pretty much predict how the story is going to end, but it was a very sweet and enjoyable read. I'm glad I picked it up, and from what I understand, Lynn Painter has a couple other books in this world with the characters, so I'm interested in looking into those and hopefully reading them soon. That was Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. The next book I read was The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Similarly to Better Than the Movies, not originally on my summer TBR, but I happened upon it in a thrift store this time for like under $1, so I had to pick it up. I wasn't necessarily ever interested in reading this book. It wasn't on any of my TBRs. However, I did read the Hunger Games trilogy back when I was in high school, and I was intrigued by President Snow and how evil and vicious he was. So when I found out that this was like the prequel and the history of Snow and why he turned out to be the way he is, I decided I'd pick it up. How could I not when it was like under $1? Granted, the condition was not fantastic. Definitely has some damage, a little warped right there, but you know what? I knew I was going to be reading it on the beach as well. Probably whoever had this book before me read it on the beach, hence the water damage. So I grabbed it, read it. It was okay. I'm happy to know a little bit of President Snow's past. I do believe this book dragged on a little too long. It was split up into 3 parts. I liked the pre-war and war history, how the war impacted Snow, his family, the people in the capital, and why the capital people feel the way they do toward the people in the districts. I was also somewhat fascinated by the actual Hunger Games and their origin, but again, it was just a little too dragged out. I did like how we got to unfold President Snow's psyche and his mindset towards certain things, and we could see his evolution into this evil president character. We could see how he started off somewhat decent and how certain events in his life made him the way he was. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about President Snow, his backstory, yes, this will give you those answers. However, again, it was dragged out a little too much. I think part 3 of this book was maybe slightly unnecessary. Maybe the information in part 3 could have been woven in somewhere else in the book or been a totally book entirely. I don't know. I can see why Susan Collins wanted to keep the whole story of President Snow in one novel, but part 3, it was just a little too much, a little too dragged out, and by that point, we kind of could predict what was going to happen in the end. So maybe if part 3 was just a little shorter. I'm not trying to bash this book by any means, because again, it's valuable if you want to know more about President Snow. just know that it is a little long and you will be putting some time into it. I do look forward to reading Susan Collins' most recent release. I think it's called Sunrise on the Reaping, which is also like a prequel or Hunger Games novel. So already have a hold on that one and hoping it comes through my library soon so I can kind of stay in this realm of the Hunger Games. It took me a little while to fall back into this world because I haven't read any of the Hunger Games since I was in high school, which was a little while ago. So hopefully Sunrise on the Reaping comes in soon so I don't need a huge refresher again. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Susan Collins was the last physical book I read this summer. For the audiobooks, I finished the Anne of Green Gables series. So I read Anne of Ingleside by L.M. Montgomery. I can't say much on it because it's the last book in the series. However, I'm so glad that I fell into the world of Green Gables with Anne for the first half of this year. I highly recommend Anne of Green Gables if you've never read it. I listened to it, but I look forward to reading the physical copies somewhere down the line. So again, I finished the Anne of Green Gables series with Anne of Ingleside this summer. And last but not least, I listened to Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. I picked this book up because I have seen it everywhere, and that cover, that blue cover with the orange octopus, is so vibrant and eye-catching that I was intrigued by the cover. So ultimately, it was the cover that pulled me in. I checked out the audiobook, and I will say it took me a really, really long time to finish it. I kind of just didn't care so much about the story for more than the first half. And then I would say the last third is really when I was just totally invested and wanted to know what was going on, what happened in the story. I know this is a majorly hyped book, and I'm not 100% sure why, but again, that's just my opinion. Others love it, and that's awesome for them. Marcellus, the octopus, was the star of the book. He was fantastic. I would recommend listening to the audiobook if you want to embark on this story. If I read the physical copy, I don't think I would have finished it at all. I think I would have abandoned the book completely. But listening to the audiobook, the narrators' voices were incredible, especially Marcellus. His chapters are so short. I wish we would have had more of him, but he is such a pivotal character in this story, and it's fun to have an octopus as a character and to personify an octopus. I never would have thought I would have read a book like that. So there's that. If you like sea creatures or personified animals, Remarkably Bright Creatures is probably for you. I will say Van Pelt did a really good job at crafting a story that seemed a bit random at times and then bringing all these pieces together. So yes, we get a lot of different storylines and little side pieces here and there, but eventually all those pieces fall together and you get a good story with a absolute conclusion, which helps because there is a mystery element to it. Without giving anything away, we have Tova, a elderly woman who is recently widowed and also tragically lost her son several decades ago, and we just follow her as she works in an aquarium in Washington. I loved the setting of Washington on the Puget Sound. That was a really beautiful, beautiful setting for the story to take place. And we just follow her as she's still grieving and mourning the loss of her husband and her son. She's constantly trying to piece together the story of her lost son. The town being so small, there have been many rumors and stories spread over the year, some of them being that the son had committed suicide, but she knows her son. She knows he wouldn't have ever done that. So we just follow her as she's cleaning this aquarium, contemplating her life, where it is now, where it was back when her son was alive, gradually putting pieces together. And again, we have Marcellus the octopus, who is in the aquarium, and he is crucial to the story and putting the pieces of her missing son's story together. So I'll leave it at that. It was good. Like, it's worth the listen if you want an audiobook. I do recommend listening to the audiobook. Just stick with it because the first half is pretty slow. That was the last book I read this summer, Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. I read a total of 7 books this summer. Not my greatest, but summer is for living, lots of walks and beach time. So I'm glad to have experienced summer in that way. Now that fall is among us, I imagine I will cozy up more frequently with a book. I look forward to sharing some of my fall TBR with you in an upcoming video. So if you want to see what I'm hoping and planning on reading this fall, make sure you tune in. Thank you so much for watching this video. I know I have been absent for a while, just again enjoying summer, enjoying family and friend time. I hope you all had a wonderful summer. Let me know what your favorite book was that you read this summer. I'm thinking my favorite this summer was probably Malibu Rising. I loved my rereads of Book Lovers and finishing up the Summer I Turned Pretty series, but in terms of new books, this one was the one for me. Malibu Rising, a 5-star, so incredible. Highly recommend. So let me know what your favorite book was that you read this summer. I am definitely interested, so leave that in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon in my fall TBR video.